Hey guys, how are you? I'm back. I'm going to do a quick video. Thank you for joining me on my thoughts on the Kotaku article that came out just recently, about 2 days ago or a day ago, talking about the Toshiro Nagashi approaching Microsoft and Nintendo to localize Yakuza, or to create Yakuza, not even localize it. It wasn't even a Japanese only game at the time, and his creation ideas and thoughts, which they denied. Now, again, this is going to be my perspective on what I think is the reasoning for it. Some will be very clear, some will be not so clear, maybe for others. Some of you will understand and agree and and understand where I'm coming from, and some of you might not. But either or, it doesn't matter. When you view the video, you let me know how you feel, what you think about my thoughts, my comments, and your own. Because that's the point of doing social videos on social media, like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and things of that nature. So let's get right to it. Toshiro Nagashi came from Atlas. He was at Atlas in the 80s to Sega, and he's been in Sega for many years. He was a part of AM2 with Yu Suzuki. He was part of Amusement Visions. He even became part of Sega World Developer something. I forgot what's the title of it, where they made the games for the GameCube, such as Super Monkey Ball, and games like the F-Zero that Sega did for Nintendo. And, I even think he had something to do with the probably most underrated Sega game of last generation, next to Vanquish, obviously, and Bayonetta, which was Binary Domain, which, in my opinion, was their version of Gears. It was like a Japanese take on Gears of War, but mixed in with other things in existence like Ghost in the Shell and Ex Machina and things of that nature. It was a very good game, and was doing some unique and intuitive things as well. Very underrated. But anyway, $21 million. That's what Toshiro spent and needed for the creation of Yakuza 1. And as you can understand, that these articles come out, a lot of people do videos on it, but they don't speak on all the little details. So hopefully, with my input on what I read, I can give you a little more in-depth about what was said. And the first thing that you'll notice when he's talking in the article is that he clearly says that Sega themselves, which was his company that he was working for, his boss, did not want to fund him for the game. Because this is a game about the Japanese mafia and about a guy that, had committed a crime that he was falsely accused of, was in jail for 10 years, and so forth and so forth. And he was denied by Sega themselves, first and foremost. And he worked for them. And with good reason, because, Sega gave Yu Suzuki a shot and took the biggest risk in gaming history at the time that they did it with, the Dreamcast, with a little game called Shenmue. And as we all know, Shenmue was the most expensive game ever made of its time at the time. And it was ahead of its time as well. It was $75 million. And we're talking about the Dreamcast era. Before the PS2 even was a thing. And the game failed because nobody embraced the Dreamcast. Because they were too busy worrying about DVD players being on the PS2. And articles saying that the PS2 was going to be like the greatest thing next to Jesus when it came out. And the launch games like Bouncer and Fantavision were horrible. Were a joke. So anyway, and these are the same people that call themselves real gamers. But yet they didn't bother to buy a Dreamcast that had probably the greatest lineup in history of any console in a short period of time. And they refused to play that to wait for this so-called PS2, claiming that they're not play slaves, and never were. Which a lot of them were, casuals. So, to continue with the subject, and that's a big, aspect and point that a lot of people have not talked about. If Sega themselves didn't take the chance because they knew it was a big risk, then for somebody like Nintendo or Microsoft, it wasn't really it wasn't surprising that they would say no at the time, okay? And the game sold 1 million copies when it came out of PlayStation 2. But in PlayStation 2, as everybody knows, and PlayStation in general, like PlayStation 1, they already had established a market in Japan, and they already had established a market in America. But they were popular in Japan. And the Yakuza game, the first one, most of its game sales came from Japan, not America. Okay? So for Nintendo, we all know they've always played the squeaky clean approach with their console and their brand. They always have. Obviously, we're in different times now, but the reasoning for it to be different now is because Nintendo realizes that if they don't start catering to a more adult audience that follows them as well and give them some more options on their platform, then they can become on the same route as Sega eventually, which will be only software only, or maybe even demise and leave because they refuse to give their IPs to anybody else. So they've been evolving little by little, So for him not to get denied by Nintendo at that point, it's completely makes sense and it's completely there, the evidence. Nintendo wasn't going to do anything like a Yakuza game that's full of quirky humor, whether it's sexual or weird, in many ways. They weren't going to take that chance, even for their Japanese market. It's not going to happen. Now, but when it comes to the Microsoft side, I see that a lot of people are trying to make it seem like they did it and Microsoft did it because they were trying to because it was a stupid move or because they didn't care, when that's really furthest from the truth. See, Yakuza came out in 2005 in Japan and then in 2006 in the States. So the Xbox 360 had came out in 2005 and then in Japan in 2006. So if he did pitch them the game at that time, it makes perfect sense why Microsoft said no. Because if you guys go back to 2001, when the release of the OG Xbox happened, Sega had did a very prominent deal. Xbox had did a very prominent deal with Sega for 12 games, which end up being 14 when it was all said and done. 14 games. 14 games on the Xbox OG platform that were exclusives. And out of all those 14 games, I would like anyone to tell me that views this, which one was a success. Because I can tell you, it was zero. None of them. The only one that did fairly okay was Sega GT, Sega GT, because it was back then as well, and I believe was Jet Set Radio, okay, because it already had established itself on Dreamcast somewhat, and a lot of guys that bought Dreamcast bought Xbox, myself included, because they were following the Sega brand, and they had the most games that were being offered that weren't going to be on any other platform. So, if none of those games sold, it obviously didn't make no sense for Microsoft that tried to establish itself in Japan by having these big Sega titles, because Sega was well known and very respected in Japan as well, that didn't do well in Japan, wasn't going to do well starting with their new console as well. It was a big risk, especially if it was a $21 million game that he had to spend. It was a big risk. And also, if you guys really look back and think about it, remember that Microsoft When they brought out the 360, the way they were trying to engage the Japanese market and catch their attention and draw them in was by doing a lot of Japanese titles, whether they were RPGs or Japanese anime centric or in style, with very well known Japanese RPG developers or anime creators. Like the Blue Dragon. Blue Dragon was from the creator of Dragon Ball Z. Like Lost Odyssey, which was one of the biggest creators involved with Final Fantasy, which I think he branched off on his own and did, the Lost Odyssey with a new house, I believe his own house or whatever. I could be wrong, but I believe that's what happened. So it would make a lot of sense that Microsoft and Xbox, as a brand, they were trying to big names to the platform so that it could catch the hardest audience and market that they haven't had a chance to still grab and hold their attention. Like they had The Last Remnant, Star Ocean, Infinite Undiscovery, Eternal Sonata, Enchanted Arms. They had so many different types of Japanese-centric games to appeal to that audience and market, and nobody bought it. The Xbox 360 only sold 67 or 64,000 copies. Lifetime, 1,000 people. You're not hearing that wrong. 1,000 in its whole lifetime in Japan. Most of its sales came from Europe, some in Canada, and obviously the America. That's why they always said that the 360 destroyed the PS3 in America, which they did. PS3 sold pretty well in all the regions, but it wasn't until they dropped the console down from the $600 price point to almost $299, I think it was, and took out a bunch of stuff and features, including backwards compat and different fiber optic, a bunch of stuff, just to make it more cost efficient. So I understand why it was done, and I don't like the way that Kotaku likes to splurge their articles, because they try to make it seem like it's gossip or like it was anti-consumer because they didn't care about their fans. And to be honest, the Yakuza series has like 6 main games, 2 remasters, 1 zombie-style game, 1 online game, and a couple other little ones here and there. And in its lifetime, they sold like 10.5 million units with like 10 games, okay, as of 2017. So in reality, as a whole, as a franchise, those are not real big numbers, but I guess they bring in profit because of the fact that the game, even though they spent the 21 million, it sold the first one. And I don't know if that was the same thing for 2 and 3, but I know the first one sold 1 million units. And more than half of that was from Japan, like I said. So that was a revenue intake of like almost 60 million. If they sold at $60, which I think that wasn't the case either, because I believe that game dropped in price very drastically, very fast, from a $60 price point to like a $20 price point, even when it was on PS2 and PS3. And it was short-lived, and that's when people actually started buying it, when it started getting word of mouth, and it became a cult following, and a cult, and one of those games that have a cult following, like, Alan Wake is today, which, is the reasoning for its continued success in a certain way, because it's still, now people are interested again because it's still PS4 exclusive. They made a remastered of the original, so and word of mouth got out, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. Although I don't think it's ever going to be in the same level as a Shenmue ever was. Obviously, I'm not talking about graphically and technically, and the fighting system is pretty fun and outrageous and a little bit over the top, but it's a very hard game because it's a niche following that it has, and a very hard game to sell and to take a big risk. So do I think it was a mistake on on Nintendo and Microsoft's part of not saying yes at the time? No, I don't. I really think the fact that Yakuza has only sold 10.5 million with all the games that it has brought out to this point shows that it wasn't really a mistake. It's hanged on for basically a little bare skin of it, for a little piece of skin. All this time has been hanging on with the sales, and for Sony, being that they were the leading platform, the leading video game market sellers, they were making the most money. They still saw some type of a profit. They just said, "Wait, what the hell? Not let's just keep doing it." Because I don't think and helping Sega publish the games, not publish the game, Sega itself, not Sony, but Sega didn't put their money publishing it. That's what I meant to say. So it was just they said yes, we'll put it on you can put it on our platform, and it did okay for them, enough to make some type of profit, and they're getting money out of it. At the same time, they have another title in their catalog, because they have to give them a certain percentage for being on the platform, obviously. So Sega, obviously, that's been the most successful title for them since forever. Since I think the Sega Genesis era and the Super Nintendo era and Sega Saturn and things like that, because their games don't really sell, with the exception of maybe Sonic. So do I think it's important for them to try to bring it and localize it now on Xbox and Nintendo? Yeah, it is, because now it has more of a following. People are more aware of it, even though it's not for everybody, and some people might even be offended by it or find it very distasteful, maybe in certain ways. But the fact that it's just another option for the brand, whether it's Xbox with Microsoft or whether it's Nintendo with Switch, that's not a bad thing. It's an option. So even if it sold, let's say 50,000 units on Xbox or Nintendo, it's still some type of revenue, and some type of audience that you're going to engage and bring in. And maybe that audience with the next game will be like, oh yeah, this one was good, try it out. And then it keeps growing as a domino effect in sales, when the perception and people accept it and like it better, because of the story or the combat or the fact that has to do with the Japanese mafia in an open world environment, semi-open world, because there's restrictions and there's clip walls. So it's good all around for the gamers on Xbox and Microsoft as a brand, and for the gamers on Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo brand. So yeah, I do think they should continue to pursue, and it should come out in other platforms. Especially the fact that it's not a an IP that Sony pays for. They just said, yes, you can put it in our platform. It's Sega, the one that's that's publishing it, and that it's taking the chance with it now, all these years later. So that's what I think it is. I just don't like that a lot of people are trying to slander it like it's like Nintendo didn't care and Sega don't care. Now they want to care all of a sudden. I just think it's a different era and a different time for both companies, for all the companies. And they have to make changes and evolve to stay up with the audience and what demands and what people want and don't want. And more is better. And on top of that, it was the same thing with Bayonetta. The example with Bayonetta, because it didn't sell well on either PS3 or Xbox 360, Sega didn't want to publish the game again. So they branched it out to somebody else to publish it, which ended up being Nintendo. Nintendo was trying to establish an adult audience, so they said, hey, what the heck? And now it's a Nintendo exclusive, even though it's still an IP owned by Sega, and it's an IP created by Platinum Games, or developed by Platinum Games, but it's owned by Sega. So that's a good example. Or when the creators of Insomniac with Sunset Overdrive, that they wanted to make Sunset Overdrive, but they wanted to retain the IP for themselves because they've sold every IP they've created, like Ratchet and Clank and Resistance, to PlayStation. That was the only way they were able to have the games be made. If with the deal was that they had to own the IP, and they didn't want that. And Microsoft was the only one that told them, okay, you can make it on our platform, just make it exclusive. You can keep the IP, retain all the properties for the future, for DLC or anything, and that's fine with us. And you have all the creative freedom. And they believed in the project, and even helped them fund the game and publish it, which Insomniac, themselves said on Twitter, and articles, and publicly. Plus, they also said that Sony didn't really want cartoon-style games on their platform at the time. They wanted more photorealistic games. Hence the reasoning why a lot of games now on PS4, if you look at them, have just photorealistic looks to them, including even games like Until Dawn, which is basically an interactive movie. So I think it just was at the time and the situations and that this happened. I don't think it was because they didn't, plus different people running it, they didn't give two craps. It's a lot more deeper than that. A lot of it had to do with the non-success of Shenmue, Sega not wanting to take a chance again, Microsoft doing the 12-game deal that didn't pan out for them. As a matter of fact, Toshiro was involved with Spike Out. And Spike Out on the OG Xbox, it came out on OG, and it didn't sell at all. I didn't know if he even sold 1,000 units. And he was the head director of this game. So that would give you even more reason why. Oh, I don't know, man. Plus the fact that it has to do with the Japanese mafia, which has to do with Japanese culture, not really an American thing. So, it was a big risk. So I understand why Microsoft, more than likely, that was the reasoning, and those factors filled in why they said no. And now it's different because they see that the Japanese games are being embraced more than ever before, and even now in this generation, and on all platforms, and people are more open-minded. It's a different time. Plus, the IP has established itself through almost 20 years, 15 years, whatever it took, since it came out, 10 years, 12 years, whatever. So now it's different. It's an established IP. It's different. Taking a chance is not as risky. Okay, guys, anyway, thank you for tuning in. I haven't done one of these in a while. I was in the car picking up the kids from work. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get my perspective and you enjoy what I tried to elaborate on and break down and why I think and said what I said. So, like, comment, share it, and, let me know what you guys think. And if you're new to my channel and subscribe, thank you very much, because I know you don't have to, but if you do, I really appreciate it, and you become part of my family. And also, big shout outs to my Xbox brethren in the community, from DirectX all the way down to Intro Media, all the way to the Direct Gaming, the Infinite Rooms of DX Mansion, a Microbox of X, and the Micropod, the Microfilm podcast, which should be coming soon, which I'm going to be a new member of, as well with E-Rock X and Microbox. Big shout outs to Sega Man, Sega Forever, Tuck Master, Sir Merkham, Big Kahuna, Master Chief, Poseidon Aru, Megatron, UK Dazzler, Welch Gamer, a lot of, Kaleidoscope, Ghost Rider, J Long, all those who rock out, Flip Money, Mr. 100, Distillion, K Mega, all the guys that, are part of the family and we rock out. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. Until the next video, hopefully it'll be a couple playthroughs I'm planning on doing. That's my thought, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and understand where I came from. Take care, guys. Peace. Love you. See you soon.